Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. Well, it's that time when we catch up with our friend in the United States, Richard Kazimer. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing fine. Actually, we're about to do part two. We talked about retirement and some of the benefits that people have when they retire, or some of the benefits people don't have when they retire, whatever the case may be, last week. But, of course, retirement sometimes is a little bit more, how can I put it, about what people are going to do with themselves when they retire than anything else, such as where are they going to live. Now, this, not all that many years ago, was probably to a certain extent taken care of by families. People might have had a grandparent live with them, or grandparents live with them. Doesn't seem to be the case, certainly here in Australia. It's certainly not as common as it once used to be, and I imagine, Richard, it's probably also not as common in the United States as it once used to be. So this week we're going to have a look at retirement, accommodation, and the type of communities in which many retirees live in the United States. Now, what's the picture there? Because certainly the trend here has been that in a time, and certainly when I was a kid, there were lots of folks, myself included, who had a grandparent who lived at home with them right up until they passed away. That doesn't seem to be so common now. Is that also the case in the US?
You know, we're actually seeing a return of that because of the economy. We're seeing adult children moving back in with their parents and taking over the house and taking care of their parents in their old age. So we are seeing that because of the economy. But the options that are out there, depending on how much money one has, there's a vast amount of options available for retirees because it's such a huge market. Looking at some of the demographics here, the age group 15 to 64 years old in this country makes up 67% of the population. Those who are 65 years and over make up about 13%. So that's still a huge market for the industry, and they all have disposable income too, because there's really nothing left to spend it on except the rest of their lives, which has been expanded due to healthcare improvements. We have, on the high end, there are retirement communities that offer independent living. Now, these are options where you can actually own your own home within a retirement community, or a condominium situation. You make your own meals, you have access to the clubhouse, it could be near a golf course, there's entertainment, there's pool, there's shuttle transportation, community activities, and the whole 9 yards. Now, what people do with that is if they planned ahead, that's where they dump the remainder of their money. They've left everything that they can to their kids, and now they're going to enjoy these golden years in relative luxury, and those things are expensive. Then, depending on your health, you get into an assisted living situation, again in a community such as the independent living, only these are smaller condos. There's on-site medical facilities, in-home nursing care. All meals are provided, so you don't have to cook your own meals. And the amenities might be similar to the independent living, but they're scaled back due to any sort of infirmment of the residents. And then you get into constant care or nursing home facilities. Those are varied as well. Those are for people who require 24/7 care. These are people who suffer from Alzheimer's, strokes, they're immobile. In each of these cases, you have to prove a stable financial means to be provided to even be accepted, especially in the independent living or the assisted living environments.
Now, what about some of these villages where people go and live, and they're starting to become quite popular here? They're called lifestyle villages. They cut in at various different ages. I mean, the youngest I've heard of a lifestyle village starting here is 45. 45 or 55 seems to be a common age, and I think there are some that are 65. How popular are those in the US, especially for those people who are quite capable of still living independently by themselves, but they don't want to live in the original family home because basically it's surplus to requirements these days?
That's a huge industry here. There are some cases where one of the spouses, this may have been the second or third spouse, and if the person had married a trophy wife or a trophy husband and they're much younger, some of these communities won't even let in the new spouse, even though the person qualifies. If the person is 65 or older, but their new spouse may be in their 30s or 40s, they actually get turned away from communities because the requirements are very strict. But it is a huge industry, and a lot of these places are just fabulous. It's like you can't wait to get old to move into these places. They are just incredible places.
What sort of facilities do they have? I mean, I know here, and I've only ever seen the ads. I must confess, I've never actually been and had a look at one of these lifestyle villages. But when you see the ads, and there are certainly plenty of them that advertise at the moment, they look pretty impressive, I've got to say. So obviously I would venture to say that we're imitating the sort of things that are seen in the US. Have you actually seen one of these for yourself? Because I know the glossy brochures and the advertising on TV makes them look really good, and I'm just wondering if they really are that good.
The experience that I've had in the state of Maine, I worked for a musical theater company, and one of the primary sponsors was a gentleman who started one of these communities and has since expanded tenfold, and it's actually like a quarter the size of the town now. It's its own little village, and he is doing extremely well. I'd say he's had this thing going for almost 20 years, and in spite of the economy, he does extremely well because the 65-plus market is always growing. Years ago, you would lose a certain percentage of that group due to natural causes, but the way healthcare is now, people are living much longer, so there are more and more people going into these communities. But yes, indeed, I have seen these, and they are nothing short of luxurious. You have a main house area that has beautiful dining facilities. You have recreation buildings. It could be on a golf course. There is transportation provided. We performed in the entertainment area itself. They offer discount tickets to these folks. It is really good. I mean, anybody worth it that knows what they're doing in the property management industry recognizes how important and how lucrative the 65-plus market is.
Now, when you have a look at those lifestyle villages, how does it work in the US? I mean, obviously people buy into them. There is a point at some point at which the person passes on. It's not like, say, for example, a family home or indeed even an apartment which can be left to children. It's obviously something that has to be sold. What's the arrangement and how does that work in the US?
The surviving spouse obviously would get dibs on the apartment. They own it outright.
The other question that I was asking in regard to this is, let's say, for example, the last person dies. Okay, so there's one person, a widowed person, who's living in the lifestyle village in the unit themselves. They then pass on. They can't obviously will that to their younger children. What happens then?
I believe it goes back to the community. It goes back to the property management.
Do they have to buy it back? What's the arrangement financially there?
I'm sure that that's all worked out when they sign at move-in, because that's a genuine concern as to what happens to it after that. I don't believe the surviving children would have any say in the matter, so it's all contractually divided up. It's almost like you have to sign off on it, that there's really nothing to sell once the people are gone.
I mean, there must be some sort of financial return. If people have to buy one to go in there, surely that'd have to be some sort of financial reimbursement to the estate once that person was deceased. I mean, you wouldn't pay $300,000 to go into something and then at the end of it say, okay, well, there isn't going to be anything, because I don't think a lot of people would be too happy with that arrangement.
Yeah.
I also imagine that the type of stuff you're talking about is also the kind of accommodation that not a lot of retirees, based on what we talked about last week, you kind of imagine the sort of retirement that we've been talking about thus far is not the sort of thing that a lot of folks could afford. What do most folks do in their retirement as far as their living is concerned?
There are options. There's low-income housing. There are property management companies that will have high-rise apartments, and they can allocate a percentage or that entire location to low-income elderly housing. And now they get a tax benefit from the states for allocating low-income and offering low-income rent in a high-income district. A lot of times, if you allocate a certain portion to either low-income family rent or assisted living for elderly, and you have a loan, you get a percentage reduction on that loan until that loan comes to fruition. So it's to the property management's advantage to offer either a percentage of those apartments to assisted living or elderly low-income housing, or at 100%. These are very modest apartments. They do have their kitchens. There's no on-site medical facilities or anything like that, but it is at a substantial rate. Now, you do have to qualify. Your yearly income cannot exceed something like $16,000 a year. Usually the cost of living there is about 50 to 70% of their monthly income. And how the property management can survive by offering these low-income rents is that the state agencies supplement that rent. The people who live there can go to their local agencies, social service agencies, and get rent assistance as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be the only way that they would survive under those circumstances. Now the other issue, it does happen here as well, is the issue of people going to live in places that are almost like retirement places. The place that we seem to hear a lot of in Florida, in the United States, is Florida, being a popular place for retirement. Is that true, or is that just a rumour, or is that a place where people like to go in their retirement years?
No, that is true. That has been a tradition for many, many years here, particularly people in New York that had moved down there. It's a huge Jewish population. Boca Raton is a famous place. The average age is 60 plus. Also, for people from New England, instead of going to Florida, you'll see people move to the Carolinas, which is very attractive. The cost of living is cheap. It's warm year-round. That's the attraction. But yes, indeed, Florida is the heaven's waiting room is what it's affectionately called.
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly, I was looking up a little bit of information, and I believe that the biggest single form of air freight is people's coffins being transported back to their home states for burial. Out of Florida, that's one of the biggest forms of air freight.
I am not surprised.
What other states? You mentioned the Carolinas being quite popular. Are there any other states? One sort of imagines that there might be a few people who'd find their way to places like California as well.
Well, California is very expensive, so you see fewer people traveling all across the country, particularly if you haven't been out there and haven't spent any time up until the point you retire, it's not likely that you would move out there. Arizona at one time was very popular. Its population is primarily, in modern times, due to retirees going out there or people that suffered from allergies because the air is so dry. Not so much as in the western states, New Mexico, if you have the artistic incline, it's a very artistic community. Tahoe is a very good place for retirees. But people have a tendency, especially if you're from New England or from some of the northwestern states, that you want to go someplace where there is no snow and it stays relatively mild year-round. Missouri is a big attraction, somewhat. New Orleans, Louisiana, places like that are attractive.
Do you ever find places that retirees just simply don't go? I mean, you mentioned California because it's expensive. Is there anywhere else where retirees just generally don't go? Is the reason, for example, they leave places like New York simply because it's too expensive to stay there after they retire?
Generally, people don't go to places because the weather, the cost of living, the crime rate, the age, the demographic is another thing. People don't want to go where there's a lot of schools, a lot of young children. They're set in their ways, and they want to enjoy these as long as possible in relative comfort, quiet, security, and with people of their own mindset. And it could be, too, that they want to go someplace where they have it all, including modern entertainment, modern shopping, things like that. So there are communities within this country that are built and cater specifically to the 65 plus.
Now, what about looking after seniors who are infirm to a greater or lesser extent? That is, those that need some degree of care, all the way up to, I guess, as we've talked before, there are facilities, obviously, for people like dementia patients who need constant 24-hour ongoing care. But what about those people who have physical limitations and require some degree of care, but also are capable of maintaining some sort of independence? Is there much accommodation for them?
Yes, there are, and that goes back to the availability, supply and demand, where any market that recognizes that issue will develop something like that, or in the other case, you may have to move away from your home to find a constant care or nursing care facilities. I know there is a huge Jewish organization here in Greater Boston that has several of some of the most prestigious constant care nursing home facilities in the country, and they are remarkable. You really have to seek these things out, and those are very expensive too. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases where if someone is infirmed, they may have to sell everything they own, or their families have to sell everything they own to get these folks into these facilities to spend the rest of their lives. A lot of times these people that are going into there, they're not in there for rehab. They're in for the duration. There's hospice care. That is also a growing market as well. You have to seek these things out. They are expensive. Insurance does cover some of it, but you're looking at pretty much wiping everything out in their lives, changing to the rest of their lives being in this situation.
Yeah, I think one of the other interesting points here, which maybe we could touch on, I'm kind of thinking this wouldn't be the sort of thing that would happen in the US simply because I don't think the hospital system would allow it. Here, there is often criticism of the fact that sometimes seniors find themselves having an extended hospital stay simply because they're waiting for a bed in a nursing home or an aged care facility. Does that happen in the US?
Yes, it does. That's a great point. We are seeing a shortage of beds from assisted living to nursing home facilities on down because of that reason. The population is growing so fast, and that the people on the tail end of the 65-plus demographic are finding themselves there. And in a lot of cases, they have to be sent home because the hospitals can't handle them, so they contact an available family member, send them to their home, and then the in-home care kicks in until they can find a facility that'll take them in.
All right, well, look, thanks very much for your time. As always, most interesting finding out about these things. Now, if you'd like to befriend Richard on Facebook, you can. Richard S. Kazimer is his name, and his surname is spelled Kazimer. Richard S. Kazimer, and if you'd like to be his friend on Facebook, he's always looking for friends, can use all the friends he can get. My friend, as always, thank you very much, and we'll have a chat next week.
All right, brother, go Dockers.